Okay. Um, so, right. So congrats. Congratulations on receiving Conservancy grants. We like to first thank you for all the work that you do in promoting our mission of just conserving and protecting the coast. And we're very excited to help you fund your project. So everything that we will go over today can be found on our grantee manual. And if you have any further questions after the webinar, you can um, connect with your project manager who will help you with any steps in this process. So during this webinar, we'll give a high level overview of the process of conservancy grants, and we will go through each of these steps, starting with the grant agreements. After each section, we will pause and open the floor for any questions that the folks may have. So during that time, after each section, feel free to raise your hand or enter your question in the group chat, and we will go over, yeah, and we will try to address your questions. So yeah, first here we have the grant agreements. So what is the grant agreement? It is essentially, um, it outlines the terms and condition of a grant. So it's legally binding and so it's a contract. Your project manager will help draft the grant agreement for you. And in order to draft a grant agreement, we will ask that you submit a standard 204 form. So that's the payee data record. And on that form, you will fill out the address for where you would like your reimbursement check to be sent. On the grant agreement, there are three important dates that we would like to highlight. The first one is the completion date. So that is the date that all of your work that you plan to build a conservancy needs to be completed by. So once the date, yeah, so for all three of these dates, we do offer some room for flexibility, but since the grant agreement is a legally binding contract, any changes to the grant agreement will require a formal amendment process, which will take time. So we encourage you to pay attention to setting these dates so that we minimize the changes needed for the grant agreement. So like I said, the first one is the work completion date. And that's when all the work for the project should be completed by. The next date we have on here is the final request for disbursement submittal date. So this is generally 1 month after the work completion date. And that's when we asked you to submit the final report as well as the final invoice for the project. Then finally, we have the grant termination date. So this date is set 3 months after the work completion date. And that is essentially the termination of your contract with the Conservancy. So if we have any grantees in the room who plan to carry out a construction project, this date will be the termination date will be 20 years after the completion date because we expect all improvements to be in place with any maintenance for 20 years. So once the grant agreement is, so once we have the standard 204 form, and after we have established, after you have worked with your project managers to establish the 3 dates, your grant agreement will route the grant agreement to you on DocuSign, where you'll have time to go over. And once that's finalized, a grant agreement number will be assigned, and that is the grant number for the funding that was approved at the board meeting. Okay, so that was all I had for grant agreement. We will open the floor to any questions that folks may have for the grant agreement process. Do we have any questions?
No
Okay,
questions in the chat. Yeah.
yeah, no questions. All right, then I will pass it on to Bryce, who will take you through the conditions precedents of the grant.
Yeah. Thanks, Irvin. And I'd just like to also take a second if attendees can please mute their microphones to reduce any sound interference, that would be wonderful. All right, so we're going to start talking about conditions precedent. And what we mean by conditions precedent are conditions that we require before your grant, before you could start spending money on your grant. And it's these conditions precedent are outlined in your grant agreement, but they are four main components. So we have the grantee board resolution, some proof of insurance, a statement that identifies and confirms that all permits and approvals required for your project have been obtained. So if you don't have any permits or approvals that you need, you just need to send an email to your project manager saying so that they can save that in their project files. And then we also need a work program, and that's going to include your budget, a definition or identifying who your subcontractors are, and identifying a plan for acknowledgement. Next slide, please. So let's first talk about the board resolution. So I have a sample resolution here on the right, but this is a document that basically just shows us that your board knows what the project is. They understand that they got conservancy funding for the project, and importantly, that they assign a designated person to act as a representative of the grantee. So this is going to be the person who signs the grant agreement. Next slide, please. Then we have the proof of insurance. So the insurance, there's an example certificate of insurance on the right, where you show that you've met the minimum insurance requirements as defined in your grant agreement. And I'm going to show you those on the next slide, but you do need to name the conservancy as additional insured. And if you have subcontractors, you may need bonding and or lien release, depending on your project, and specifically if you're going to be giving the contractor more than $20,000. Next slide, please. So here's the common insurance minimums. The reason I say common is because it's going to depend on your specific project. But in general, we require $2 million for general liability, $1 million for automotive liability, and $1 million for workers' compensation. All right, next slide, please. So I will pause here for any questions. We're going to then move on to talking about the work program. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'm going to pause just in case anyone's typing or just wants to raise their hand. All right, I think we can move on then. Next slide, please. So the work program is a roadmap that you write to help the project manager from the conservancy understand how you are going to conduct your project. So it's kind of this shared understanding, showing the steps of your project, and we break them down by tasks. And so what we mean by that is generally we have 4 tasks for a project. First is project management. So this is any kind of grant management that you have for your project. That would include any meetings with your project manager. It could be writing any invoices or progress reports necessary as part of your conservancy grant. So it's any kind of grant management for that first task. The second task is generally like project preparation. So this can be sending out announcements for a community engagement workshop. It could be going to the site and doing any site visits before you actually start construction. And then the third task is generally implementation. So this is for a construction project, you actually getting the shovels in the ground and doing the project. And then lastly is monitoring or evaluation, where you're collecting data, you're writing those final, or yeah, writing the final reports, and that's kind of like the completion of your project is kind of towards the end. And so for each of those tasks, you will have deliverables, and we define deliverables as documents or pictures showing that the work for that task has been complete. So that can be progress reports, it can be receipts from contractor work, it could be photos of the community engagement workshops. So those are a few examples of deliverables, but just keep in mind as you're writing the work program, especially trying to identify your deliverables, it should be something that you can email to your project manager. So it would not be installing, 50 native plants. It would have to be photos of the installation process or photos of the plants actually in the ground. And so this work program can be a living document. We understand that projects change depending on certain events that happen throughout the life of your project. So the work program can change, and the way that you change your work program is through going into this Word document, tracking changes and updating the work program. And then you send that over to your project manager, they review the changes, and they can accept them or go back and forth with you to discuss the work program. So it's very easy to update it. Nothing is set in stone here, but it's really important at the start of your grant to just kind of get this roadmap in place. And just keep in mind that it might take a few drafts and back and forth with your project manager at the beginning of your grant to satisfy this condition precedent. All right, next slide, please, Urban. All right, so let's zoom into the work program. Since this is such an important document, we really want to make sure that we explain each of the pieces of the work program. So first up is the project description. So this is a concise, high-level summary of your project that has the goals and steps towards the goal for your project. It's generally one paragraph, and you can take this paragraph from your application. It can come from the grant agreement, or it can also come from the staff recommendation, or you can write it from scratch. But yeah, it's just a simple kind of one paragraph definition of your project. Next slide, please. Then we have scope of work by task. So this is going to outline your tasks that you have. Remember, there's generally about 4, and you're going to describe the task and the task deliverables in this section. You can see here on the slide that we have subtasks also as an option for your work program, but just note that these are optional and they're just to help you keep organized about your project. But when it comes to invoicing, you are going to be invoicing by the overall task, not by subtask. All right, next slide, please. Then we have the work program schedule, which is a table of basically everything that you had for the scope of work, but just in table format. So it's kind of like a summary. And then it also has estimated completion dates. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Where this is an example of a planning project where they have 6 tasks. And they have the task title, the deliverables for those tasks. You can see for task 1, they also broke it out by subtask. Again, this is not required, but it just might help for your organization. And then they have estimated completion dates. So it's one date for each task. And then click again, Irvin. Here's another example. This is of a construction project, and you can see it's a little more detailed. And this was, the option of the grantee for them to choose how much detail they want to have for that estimated, start and completion date. But we really look at overall the task start date and end date. We don't look at all that detail. So it's up to you how much you want to include. All right. Next slide. So here is, in the work program, you're also going to have a budget. And again, it's going to be a budget broken down by task. And this is an example budget where it shows those 4 tasks of project management, some kind of preparation, construction or implementation, and then reporting and review. They also have a line item for indirect costs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. But I just want to really highlight that simplicity in your budget does allow for flexibility. So we recommend, using kind of larger overarching tasks for your project, and then having a budget associated with that, so that there's not so much detail that it doesn't allow for any flexibility, or you have to do a work program update every time you need to submit an invoice. So for example, see how there's almost $90,000 for project construction, and that will include staff costs. It will include any charges to subcontractors and any materials. But for example, if this grantee spent a little bit more on materials than they originally thought, and a little bit of less time, money on staff costs, the way that this work program is set up, the budget, is that flexibility would all be covered with the current work program. All right, next slide, please. So you will also be required to give some more detail about what expenses you think that you're going to incur during your program, during your project. So this includes direct costs such as materials and supplies. So this can be personal protective equipment, including, boots, hats, waders. It can be sunscreen. It can include any project preparation materials such as printing, shovels for construction, etc. If you do have any equipment that will outlive the life of the grant, such as, waders that are over $100, they're going to last longer than your 5-year project. So you just need to write, we have a phrase that you put in your grant agreement in your work program that says that you will be retaining the equipment and use it for similar purposes in the future. But we just really also want to make sure that you are running those costs past your project manager to make sure that we can indeed reimburse you for those costs. And we have budget guidelines linked on the bottom left of this slide. So that'll be a really great document to look at to make sure that some of those more expensive equipment purchases can be covered with this grant. Then you're also going to have your mileage, any kind of travel. So let us know if you're going to be renting a truck. Let us know if you're going to be charging mileage. You'll need to be doing mileage logs with that, and Irvin will talk about that in the invoicing section. Then you'll talk about what kind of equipment you want to purchase. And then if you're going to be purchasing any food, for example, for community engagement workshops, maybe you want to have food at the event. So you can write that into your work program. You'll also identify staff time that you plan to use, or staff that you plan to have time charged in this project. So you just need to list out their titles. You don't need to identify names. You don't need to say how many hours they're going to work or how much they're paid. That will all go into your invoicing. You just need to know the titles. And then say if you're going to be using any stipends. So stipends are allowed, but we do have some constraints. So please make sure if you are going to be charging stipends to your grant that you talk to your project manager beforehand. Some of those restrictions include giving out cash instead of, we can't give out gift cards or like transit passes. And if you do want to reimburse them for travel, then we have to do it using the travel guidelines. And there's more information about the travel guidelines linked in the work program template. And then indirect costs. So indirect costs are charged as a percent of your overall grant, and they cover costs that your organization may incur, such as rent or electricity, telephone bills, other office expenses. And you will charge a percent of your overall grant to help partially reimburse your organization for some of those costs. And we are assuming that you're charging indirect costs rates to multiple grants. So that's how you're helping to get reimbursement for those costs. We don't require any backup documentation in your invoices for this. We just see the percent charged for each invoice. And we just want to, we just ask that you make sure that you're calculating your indirect costs based on accounting standards. This is not something that Conservancy helps calculate. We recommend that you talk to an accountant and just determine what percentage you should use for your indirect cost rate, and make sure that you keep detailed records. In the unlikely case an audit ever does occur, that you have backup documentation for all of those expenses. And then last part, the work program, the budget details is for subcontractors. So these are any organization or people that you hire to help perform work for your grant. And so if you know who your subcontractors will be already, you can list out their role, their tasks, and any kind of deliverables that they'll have. And the project manager will approve your subcontractors as part of your work program approval. But if you don't know who your subcontractors are before your grant starts, that was totally fine. You can either add them as a work program update, further along in your grant, or you can email your project manager with their information.
Hey, Bryce.
Yes.
Sorry to cut you off, but there seems to be an issue with your microphone.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Is it too far away? Is that better?
No, it's like cut. I don't know if there are connectivity issues. It's just very it's choppy, and someone said it best earlier. It's like garbled. It just it sounds like you're underwater.
That is a bummer. Let me try unplugging my headphones. Maybe it's the headphone issue. Let me make sure. Okay, is this any better?
That seems to be better.
Testing 1, 2. Okay, I guess it was my headphones. I'm so sorry about that, everybody. Did we catch what's required as part of the work program, or should I try to go back and kind of review what I already discussed? Did it start on this page, or did it start really when I started talking?
It started on this page. Yeah.
Okay, so there was lots of information on this page, so I will go ahead and do this page again. Thank you so much for letting me know, Christine. Okay, so work program budget details. So this is where you identify what kind of costs you will have for your project. So it's broken down into direct costs and subcontractors. So for direct costs, you'll identify what kind of materials you'll be purchasing as part of this grant. So this can include personal protective equipment, such as sunscreen, sun hats. It can be waders, it can be boots, any kind of equipment that you need to perform your grant. It can also be printing, such as printing flyers, and it can be other equipment as required for construction, such as shovels or plants. So those are examples of materials. If you do have any equipment that will outlive the life of the grant, such as the, like I'm thinking of waiters that are, more than $100, they're going to last longer than your 5-year program. So you just need to have a statement in your work program that says that you will continue to use the materials past the life of the grant for similar purposes. And if you do have equipment that will outlive the life of the grant, please check with your project manager to confirm that it is okay to use the equipment, or I'm sorry, to purchase the equipment. We do have some guidelines of items that we cannot reimburse, such as like expensive computers. We wouldn't be able to purchase for your grant. But we have budget guidelines linked in the bottom left of this slide. Okay, and then also for direct costs, you're going to have any kind of mileage or travel that you plan to do as part of this grant. You'll list out also any food. If you want to purchase food for community engagement workshops, you can do so. Just let us know in this section. And then we have also need to identify what staff are going to be working on this grant. So this can just be the staff titles. You don't need to identify names or hourly rates or number of hours as part of the grant. That information is all included in invoices. So it does not need to be in detail here. And that also allows for some flexibility on your end if you end up, using a different staff person with the same title on the grant, or if you end up giving your staff a raise, you don't need to do a work program update. You do also need to let us know if you're going to be doing stipends as part of your grant. So we have some restrictions on how we can reimburse stipends. So please make sure you talk to your project manager if you do plan to give out stipends. Generally, these stipends we see used for like reimbursing for time for community members to come to, for example, a community engagement workshop. And you can, for stipends, you can use cash. We don't allow gift cards or gas cards or transit passes to be used as stipends. So again, please just check in with your project manager before you starting your grant if you're using stipends. And then we have indirect costs. So indirect costs are charged as a % of your overall grant. And it can be used to partially reimburse your organization for costs of doing business, such as rent for your office space. It can be office expenses like paper and pens and supplies like that. Help reimburse for electricity, etc. So your indirect cost rate should be calculated based on accounting standards. And this is something that we recommend that you go and talk to an accountant about if you don't already have an indirect cost rate established for your organization. It's not something, unfortunately, that your conservancy project manager can help with, but you'll just need to charge your indirect cost rate to each of your invoices, and you don't need to provide any backup documentation for that. And then lastly, we have subcontractors. So subcontractors are people or organizations that you hire to help perform grant work under your grant. And if you know them already, you can just list out their role, their tasks, and their deliverables in your work program. But if you don't know your subcontractors yet, that is okay. You just need to email your project manager once you do know your subcontractor, or just do a work program update. Okay, next slide. The last piece of your work program is going to be a plan for acknowledgement. So the Conservancy does require that you acknowledge.
So your microphone is going out again.
Oh my goodness, it must be my internet. Is this any better? Getting close here.
Yeah, that's better.
It's better. Okay, I'm just going to try to talk loud and clear. And Christine, please interrupt me again if it's not working. And then Irvin knows this process inside and out, so he can always take over too. So the plan for acknowledgement, we require that you acknowledge the Conservancy for grant funding. The reason is because our funding comes from the public. It's from props and from bonds. So we just want to tell the public what amazing work our grantees are doing and help us to secure future funding for our programs. So different ways that you can have acknowledgements. If you have a physical project where you're doing construction, you can have a sign or an interpretive sign that has our logo on it. You can acknowledge us in social media posts or on your website, in press releases, or in program brochures. Okay, next slide. And then the last piece is your start work letter. I'm going to pause though for questions. And I do see that there are some in the chat. Okay. So Jack says, sorry, let me just make sure. Okay, there we go. So Jack says, it seems to me that most of what you have discussed up to this point are only property insurance and may apply to acquisition projects. It would be helpful if you could identify what applies to acquisitions. Thanks for the question, Jack. So we do have multiple different types of projects that went to the board in June and that have different grant agreement templates. I went more with construction and planning projects because those are our most common types of grants, but you can always talk to your project manager specifically about what is needed for acquisition projects and how it's different. For insurance, I am not familiar with if there are any differences, Jack, with what the insurance is required, what is it required for the insurance, but while Irvin is presenting, I can take a look at our grant agreement template and see if there's any differences. The other question here is from Ed. Is all risk or course of construction insurance necessary for a project without a building that might burn down during construction, like grading and planting project? So Ed, I would talk with your project manager, and your project manager will connect with your project attorney and see what kind of insurance is required for your specific project. I think that's kind of the best course of action there, Ed. Okay, and I think that's all for questions. Any questions in the room that I can answer? If anyone wants to hop off mute, you're welcome to do so now. Okay, I will then continue on with start work. So the last kind of piece before you can start working on your grant and start spending money on your grant is to get a notice to proceed or start work letter. And so here's an example of what that start work letter will look like. And I have circled here an important piece of the start work letter is the date. So anytime on or after that date, you can charge the Conservancy for any costs incurred as part of your grant. And this notice to proceed is given to you after your project manager has checked that all of your conditions precedent have been met. Next slide. Beautiful picture, and handing it back over to Irvin.
Thanks, Bryce, for going over the conditions precedent work program start work. All right, so your grant has gone to the point where you're ready to start work, and you have worked a couple months and you're ready to submit your first invoice for reimbursement. I will go over now what our invoicing and progress report process looks like. Okay, so to get reimbursed for project expenses, we ask that you invoice no more than quarterly, so every 3 months, or no less than quarterly, my bad, and no more than monthly. So when you invoice, an invoice should have 3 items: a progress report, an RFD, which is short for request for disbursement form, and also backup documentations, all of which I will go over in the following slides. So you'll combine all of those pieces into into a single PDF file, and you will email that to our invoices department at invoice@scc.ca.gov, and you'll also CC your project manager to that email so they know that you have invoice. Okay, so progress report, the first piece of the invoice. So we ask that you on the progress report, that's where you can update the project status, as well as including the work that was carried out, challenges that the project faced, and also just like successes during the billing period. If you have any pictures, we love pictures. We like to include them in our brochures and any of our reports. So if you have any good pictures, we ask that you send them directly to your PM to retain like photo quality, so you don't have to include any pictures in the report, but and that could be sent separately. So yeah, in the progress report, we have the link there on the slide that you can refer to later, but in general, it just summarizes the work that was carried out in each of the work program tasks. Here we have the RFD, so the request for disbursement form. So this is the cover page of your invoice package that summarizes all the work and the balance that incurred during the billing period. And we offer the RFD in both a PDF and Excel format for your convenience. And they're also linked on our website. So first page of the RFD. So there are a couple of things I want to highlight on the RFD. So first, starting from the top of the page, we have address that I circled in the red box. So the address that you enter on the RFD should match the address that was submitted on the STD 204 form. And that's a payee data form that I went over earlier. So make sure that those addresses match. Otherwise, we won't be able to send the reimbursement to you. I just realized I forgot to go over any address change that could occur over the grant. So in the event of an address change during your grant period, we ask that you connect with your project manager and submit an updated STD 204 form so that the address is consistent with your updated address is consistent with what we have on file. So that's what we have. So that's important the importance of address on the request for disbursement form. Next, we have the work program task number and name. So here on this table, that's where you will outline the work program task that you plan to bill, and also the task budget that was outlined in the work program. So consistency is key. So we ask that the work program task and name and also task budget match that on the work program. If there are any changes or inconsistency in the task number or budget that was submitted on the RFD, we'll ask you to resubmit one that matches that on the work program. And finally, on the bottom of the page, I want to highlight that there's a 5% withholding that will be calculated and taken from each RFD that is submitted. So this is just like a funding withholding that we will deduct from each each payment that will be returned at the end of your grant on your final invoice. Then on page 2 of the RFD, this further breaks down the expenses that was listed on page 1. So on the top, we have, okay, well, my screen is covering it, but on the top, oh, we have direct costs and material costs. So any cost that was incurred in the grant should requires a receipt and similar like backup documentations that that shows the cost that was that you plan to bill. Then we have section 2, that's labor. So we do not require you to submit labor documentation, but you should still keep a copy as backup in case, in the event that the grant gets audited, you will be asked to provide labor documentation for the auditor. Then finally, we have the indirect cost. So again, consistency is key. Make sure that matches that on it matches the indirect cost that was approved on your work program. And yeah, on the very bottom of the page, we have subcontractor expenditure. And that's where you list the subcontractors that you may or may not have hired for your grants and the tasks that they carried out. Okay, so to go into more detail about the backup documentations, here are some examples that that we asked you to provide on your grant. So this includes like any receipts for material or project materials that were purchased. We ask that you do not include any bank statements. We just need receipts and proof of purchases. So for any online purchases, I have on the left of the side of the screen, please include the shipped invoice and any, as well as any zero balance and paid receipts. And for travel expenses, so there are 2 ways to get your car travel reimbursed. The first way is to get your personal vehicle mileage reimbursed under the state rate. So as of June 2024, the rate is 67 cents per mile. So if you plan to use your personal vehicle, then you can, we ask that you include the schedule, like the one on the bottom of the page, and that lists the to and from destinations that you travel to, and the overall mileage, and we will reimburse accordingly to the 0.67 cents rate. If you would like to get reimbursed for gas or as well as your rental car costs, then you can include your rental car receipt as well as gas receipt if you plan to get reimbursed for that instead of the state mileage rate. We can also reimburse lodging. So but all of that has to follow our travel reimbursement rate, which is consistent with the state reimbursement rate, which is linked to the bottom of the page. And there are also parking and any highways or bridge tolls that we can also reimburse. But again, we need backup documentations for that. So please keep all of your receipts so that you can get reimbursed for those expenses. Then next we have subcontractors. So to invoice for subcontractors, we ask that the invoice includes the work that was a description of the work that was carried out by the subcontractor, and depending on who you hire for your project, it could include like cultural resource specialist or like design consultant or community engagement specialist. We ask that their work is the summary of their work is consistent with is consistent with their work that is approved and that's approved in the work program. Then yeah, before we move on, I also want to project completion. I also want to make a note that the Conservancy does offer an advance funds program. So if you want to get started on your project before I guess like before the grant is ready to start, you can inquire with your you can ask your project manager to learn more about our advance fund program if you're interested. Yeah, we'll pause here and open the floor to your questions about our progress report and invoicing process.
We do have a question in the chat, but I just wanted to clarify really quick for advance funds that because we generally do reimbursable grants, this would be the Conservancy fronts the money, you spend the money, and then you provide, documentation showing that you spent the money. You still do need to, complete all your conditions precedent before spending money on the grant or starting the grant or getting your advance payment. Okay, so we're gonna answer Terry's question. If a general contractor is being used on a project, is it necessary to provide all of the subcontractor information for those working under the umbrella of the general contractor?
I see. So if a general contractor is for a project, I think, yeah, I think we would like to see all the work that is being carried out by the subcontractor. Yeah. What do you think, Bryce?
Yeah, I think that you might just want to run that by your project manager because it might be more project specific, but we want to see in the invoice that all of the project activities are, related to your grant. So I could see us wanting more detail, but again, I think maybe just run that by your project manager for your project. And then Ed has a question. I read somewhere that a paper copy of all the RFDs and backup invoices must be snail mailed to the SEC for their archives. Is that still necessary?
Okay, so yeah, that is no longer necessary. Conservancy has since updated our invoices processes. So yeah, single combined PDF file emailed to our invoices department is all you need. And I see in the room, Dylan has a question. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, thank you. So for my grant, we're purchasing equipment, like it's expensive equipment, like $150,000. Is it possible to submit a pro forma invoice? Basically like an invoice from the heavy equipment dealer, but the equipment stays in their lot. But we submit the invoice so we can, I guess it's kind of like getting the money in advance. So like, does that make sense? Like, can we submit an invoice that's pro forma to the Coastal Conservancy.
So to make sure I understand your question, you would like to submit an invoice for, sorry, can you
Yeah, sure, no worries.
yeah.
So the dealership that we're purchasing this heavy equipment from can provide us with a pro forma invoice. So is it possible to submit that that invoice to the Coastal Conservancy, be reimbursed from the Coastal Conservancy, and then take that money to the dealer to pick up the equipment?
Dylan, I think you might need to talk with your project manager before doing any of that, because I'm not sure, first of all, that we would allow for a heavy equipment purchase when it could be cheaper to rent it. So you might need to do some kind of cost comparison and send that to your project manager beforehand while you're doing your conditions precedent to make sure that we can even do that. And then secondly, if you, I'm not familiar with a pro forma invoice, but yeah, that might just be a project by project kind of question. Generally, we do see you actually doing the purchase and then sending us the receipt versus paying for something that you're going to purchase in the future. So talk to your project manager, I think is kind of the overall guidance there.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, yeah, we can move on to project completion.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take it back from Irvin now. So next slide, please. So your project, once you complete it, please do keep us still involved. We do like to see site visits, especially at the end of like construction projects. Invite us to community events, public events, press conferences. We support your project. We funded it, took it to the board. So we want to see how it's going and be part of the celebration of your project. Next slide, please. So to officially complete your project and get that withholding, that 5% withholding, all you need to do is submit all of your deliverables. You'll also have a chance to submit your deliverables as you produce them throughout the life of your grant. But if you haven't submitted all your deliverables, you need to do that before you complete your project and get that final request for disbursement issued to you. And then we will send you a check with the withholding. Next slide. I just wanted to show this awesome resource. I love this page where we have an index of forms. So all those forms that we talked about, as well as examples, are linked here and are at the end of the grantee manual on our website. Next slide. I think that should be the end. Mm-hmm.
All right, and I will just very quickly share with everyone our SCC website. Can everyone see the page I'm sharing? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So yeah, so this is the State Coast Conservancy website, and underneath, so there are a bunch of information about our different programs and what we do, but underneath grant, the grant tab, if you scroll down to resources for grantees, click on it, it will bring you to the resource for grantee page, which links the grantee manual. Scroll a little bit lower, you'll find our SCC logo, as well as the RFD pages that we mentioned, the progress report page, and instructions for invoicing is all here as well. And we also have it in Spanish. So yeah, again, this is under grant and resources for grantee. Yeah, and that's where you can find more information. But as always, if you have any questions, you can always ping your project manager, and they are more than happy to help you with your grant. All right. Stop sharing screen. Great. Yeah, do we have any more questions in the room? Okay, I don't think so. Well, I would like to thank everyone once again for attending our grantee onboarding webinar. Congratulations on your conservancy grant. We are excited to help you kickstart your project. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.